Good morning. I'll call to order our regular meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee. Today is February 4th, 2016. I'm Lisa Bender. I chair the committee. We have a quorum today with council members Reich, Goodman, and Andrew Johnson. We have 9 items on today's agenda. I'll begin with the consent items before returning to public hearing, and then we do have one discussion item at the end. The consent agenda starts with item number 2, which is approving an application for a rezoning at 3200 Bryant Avenue South from R2B to C1. Item number 2 is a rezoning for 3255 Garfield Avenue South from R2B to OR1. Item number 4 is a rezoning application approving a rezoning at 3041 Holmes Avenue South from OR2. From R4 to OR2. That's for a residential project there. Item number 5 has been revised by staff, which is in front of the committee members, so I will read that in greater detail. So item number 5 is approving an application submitted by Elsie Partners to rezone unplatted former railroad land located at 2512 Essex Street Southeast and a portion of 1710 Franklin Avenue Southeast from the LI district, which is light industrial, to R5, and remove the IL overlay district to allow a planned unit development with 195 dwelling units on the property located at 117 27th Avenue Southeast, and adopting related findings as prepared by CPED, and as well as amending Title 20, Chapter 521 of the Code of Ordinances related to the zoning code to make that change. Item number 6 is approving staff recommendation related to the environmental assessment worksheet for the Krause-Anderson project, which is so much better now. Item number 7 is referring to staff and ordinance related to pedestrian overlay districts on Hennepin Avenue, Lindale Avenue South, Nicollet Avenue, and West Franklin Avenue, authored by Councilmember Goodman and myself. Item number 8 is referring to staff and ordinance amending our code related to regulation of drive-through facilities. And those are the consent items. I will move items 2 through 8. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in approval, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And those carried. So item number 1 then is an interim use permit for a telecommunications tower, 2407 University Avenue Southeast. Mr. Giant, good morning.
Thank you, Board Chair Bender, members of the Council. My name is Joe Giant. I'm City Planner and Zoning Administration. The application before you today is for an interim use permit authorizing an 18-month extension for a temporary telecommunications tower. If this looks familiar, it's because we looked at the identical application last summer. The initial application was for this 60-foot monopole tower with antennas at the top of it to be located in the parking lot of the Days Hotel, which is right across the light rail tracks from TCF Bank Stadium. The initial purpose of this tower was to provide additional cell coverage during Vikings games. But as you probably know, there's been a little bit of growth in that area. So, and college kids and their cell phones, telecommunications demand has gone up quite a bit. So the existing infrastructure over there is not substantial enough to keep up with the increased demand. So while Verizon has to look for a more permanent site, they've asked for an 18-month extension. They're in the process of site selection with the University of Minnesota and potentially some other landowners. But this is something that would not be permanent. This is an 18-month extension. The purpose of the 18th month, rather than something longer or shorter, is this is a realistic timeline to plan for something like this. So it's not going to be done in a haphazard manner, because when we're trying to push these things through, it can kind of cripple the longer term efforts, like approving a 6-month interim use permit when you need longer. So application before you today would authorize an interim use permit until, I believe is June 23rd, 2017. No changes are proposed except for the addition of black mesh around the fence that encircles the site. So 60-foot tower, 18-month extension.
Councilmember Goodman has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How long did they have the permit for originally?
Approximately 6 months. It was from July 23rd to the last Vikings home game.
And so they didn't figure out at that point they would need that as a permanent, they would need a permanent tower in that location?
They can address their cell phone needs probably a little more accurately than I can, but I know that this process of site selection to approval generally takes at least a year.
I have a lot of cell phone towers in my ward. They seem to go up pretty fast. Looks horrible.
Yeah, they're only good when you can't see them, I think. I am,
They'll move faster if they can't have this extension of the permit. I can tell you that for a fact.
pardon me?
They'll move faster if they can't have this extension.
Speaking from experience, I know that like you have to address the property that you're going to find the site at first, and you have to go through environmental reviews, historic reviews, and then city reviews, and it takes a long time to do, and it doesn't, they never look good, but it seems, in my experience, to be a realistic timeline.
How much experience do you have siting cell phone towers?
My wife did it for a year, and I've had 2 years doing it with the city.
So 2 years with the city, that's to the extent of, how many have you done?
I've probably done probably 150 administrative reviews, probably 2 towers, a couple, I mean,
Not that much.
enough to know how long it takes to go from start to finish.
Well, why don't we open the public hearing, and then if there's any further discussion or questions from staff, we can take that then. So I'll open the public hearing for this and invite anyone else or anyone who would like to speak to please come up. Anyone like to speak? If the applicant wants to come and talk about the process.
Real estate. It's basically reiterating what he has already stated. Just addressing your question about why we didn't know in the initial piece from the 6 months why we didn't ask for a longer period of time at that point. We didn't know that this would come about. We were working on permanent solutions at that time, hoping that would speed along the process, knowing that we would need those down the line, hoping that this would cover that gap during the time. That's why I'm asking for a longer permit for now. I know that that will cover that gap and we can be done in 2 years. We started in 2014 working on this solution. We're working with the university. It's very, we're pushing as hard as we can. We'd love it to go faster. We're trying as hard as we can to get to that point. But there's only so much we can do. So we're getting pushback from them. We're meeting with them this week again and trying to get as far as we can ahead of that. So if we can take it down in less than a year and a half, I'd love to do that if we can get to that point. That would be my hope. So,
Okay. Could you just state your name for the record?
Heidi Hall, sorry.
Thank you.
Real estate for Verizon.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Would anyone else like to speak on this item? Anyone else? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. So we know they need some period of extension. So they've asked for 18 months. Could make it a year if that seems more appropriate. But otherwise, I would move the 18-month extension as recommended by staff. So discussion? Seeing none, all those in approval, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. Okay, and that item carries. That brings us to our final item, which is item number 9, related to the comprehensive plan. Ms. Mays is here to give that presentation.
I have a brief presentation here to go over why the rationale for the amendment and where the process has gone to date in terms of the review of it. The reason for this amendment was that there's 2 main things that brought about the need to bring this before you today. One is there is an inconsistency in the way our comprehensive plan guides our very highest density areas. Very highest density is defined in the comprehensive plan as being certain specific areas, not the entire area, but certain specific areas of growth centers and activity centers. Currently, there's 2 different places that the densities are mentioned. In one place, it's described as 120 units and up. In another place, 120 to 200. That has not ever been a problem in past years, but in recent years, it's become more of an issue. That is because we've had a number of development projects. I think at least, so to date, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, between 8 to 10 that have been approved, and a number of others that are in the pipeline that are significantly more than 200 units per acre. These are projects that, by nature of approval, obviously there are ones we supported and thought were good projects. But however, there's been a question about if it's the guidance, why not regulatory is in the comp plan, whether we need to amend it to make it more consistent. And to really acknowledge that in some areas, higher densities, as the market and developers have shown us, are both achievable and desirable. The scope of amendment, this was introduced by Councilmember Fry in May this past year. It is not directly related to the approval of any project. I can note that some of the discussion around this and a lot of the public comment has centered around concerns around specific development projects. Based on the timeline, you'll realize that this process predated that. A question might be, why did it take a number of months? That is because we've had an extensive discussion process with the Met Council staff. The Met Council, as required by law, will review and needs to approve this amendment ultimately before it is approved. Finally, the Council's approval effectively is contingent on the Met Council's action on it. This amendment is meant to be limited in scope, however. We are, as you all know, we are undertaking a comprehensive, thorough evaluation of our comprehensive plan over the next couple of years. That won't be done until the end of 2018. The thought was, if we're developing, these projects are happening now, waiting that long would really miss an opportunity to affirm some good projects in the meantime. So the amendment is very limited. It's only a few words, effectively, and that is because we do intend this to be opened up and discussed more thoroughly as part of the overall process. This is just an interim fix. The scope of this is not drawn on a map, but I just have here the map of our land use features. You will notice that there are only 4 growth areas: Bassett Creek Valley, downtown core, University of Minnesota, and the Wells Fargo Hospitals area. There's also a number of activity centers shown in pink on this map, which are kind of embedded or near that. Our growth centers do not have boundaries. They are just areas described in the text of the comprehensive plan. This amendment refers specifically to these 4 growth centers and to the activity centers that are in them and immediately surrounding them. This core area, as we've been seeing from the projects that have come in, is the area that's most appropriate for these high densities and already has seen some of those. And also in our conversations with Met Council, they've affirmed that this is the area with the most capacity in all our regional networks. It makes sense as we see the transit and transportation network building out the downtown and University area and the near in Bassett Creek and Wells Fargo areas are best served by water, also by transit and sewer and a number of other infrastructure needs, so that if we're going to have these very highest projects, intuitively it makes sense that it's in this area. Here's the language as it stands. I understand there may be an amendment, but as in the staff report and as the Planning Commission acted a few weeks ago, this is how it currently reads. The existing language stops at a density and is up to 200 dwelling units per acre, depending on context. The new language would say up to 800 dwelling units per acre are allowed in certain areas, the growth centers and the following designated activity centers. And this list is just a list of the activity centers in and around the growth centers. There's no special science behind them. It's just looking at the map and seeing which ones are closest. The 800 dwelling units per acre, as we had a discussion in Planning Commission, is not going to be achievable in a lot of projects. In some cases, that's only achievable in projects that effectively have lower than typical parking because they have a lot of other advantages and possibly smaller than typical units. Just to give an example of a project that's been approved above that, the Sioux Line project was one of those in downtown. And if those of you familiar with it know that the parking was accommodated in a separate building. So effectively, you didn't have building bulk being taken up by parking and therefore densities were higher. It's that type of situation that makes the very cap level. I know that that's a high number, but there are projects that approach it. And again, it's that type of situation that makes those possible. Other more achievable densities, when you're trying to park everything based on sort of more standard things, are going to be a lot closer to the 200, 300, 400 dwelling unit per acre range. Still above 200, but not that far above. Public review. The comments from the public are included in the packet and in handouts. They've been trickling in. So you've got a few more handed out to you today because some of them came in late, including a couple from the community and one from the University of Minnesota. There has been a 60-day interjurisdictional review that's required by Met Council under their statute requirements. That is complete. We sent it out to 30 different jurisdictions, all our surrounding cities and counties, all our watershed districts, I think the school district, the park board, everybody got it. We got no negative or really actually any substantive comments from any of them except just acknowledgement, thanks for sending it, we're okay with it. So nobody in that weighed in with anything that suggested change. As I mentioned before, Met Council staff have been actively involved in this review. We've been working with them over a number of months and effectively on their time frame to ensure that what we're bringing forward to you today is supportable and they understand it and we can work towards it. Frankly, they aren't usually pushed on the upper levels of density. It's usually with other jurisdictions the other way around. Some of the outer ring suburbs prefer to try to get lower densities. So it's a different realm, but we have talked a lot about the common interest and support for growing our core areas in our core city and how that fits into their regional plans and systems. A couple concerns expressed, and then I'll pause for discussion and questions. And these come out of the comments that are before you today, and also some of the discussions we've had at the public hearing at the Planning Commission, which the minutes are also available, I believe, on the website along with the comments. Not all the areas in these activity centers and growth centers are guided for high density. And we know that, very high density, and we realize that, and that's important. The staff report calls out and goes into some detail in terms of the fact that we have good small area plan coverage for pretty much this entire the area addressed in this. And the small area plans provide more detailed guidance. And this in no way says, oh, we're tossing those out the window. They're just saying when it's consistent with small area plans, we don't want the comprehensive plan language to stand in the way of those very high densities. However, of course, those of you familiar with these areas know that there's a lot of areas that it wouldn't be appropriate, and our small area plans make that clear. The other question was this would remove restriction on very high density of projects that might not be appropriate. Of course, not all of them are going to be appropriate. We called out the fact that this in no way overrules any other requirement about policy or growth and development. The whole regulatory process, people who have concerns or issues with the project can bring that before, are still going to be able to bring that before the city and have those addressed. There are still EAW requirements out there. There's still historic districts. This is only one piece in a much larger regulatory process, which you are all very familiar. So it does not in any way say, all of a sudden, we will not have any restrictions on these. We certainly will continue to have a rigorous review, especially of our largest and densest projects. And just one more note on that is that while there are projects that this will impact that are pending now, the amendment now, as I mentioned earlier, was not in any way a tag on or specifically about any one project. As I mentioned, we have upwards, if you count them all, probably upwards of a dozen projects to which this applies in some form or fashion, some retroactively because we've already approved them, others still to come. At that point, I'll pause and see if there are questions or comments.
Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So did the comp plan essentially say you couldn't have anything more than 200 units per acre?
Basically, it's not a regulatory document, of course, a policy. It's more like guidelines, and there's a lot of qualifying language saying dependent upon context. We've had attorneys at the city, specifically Eric Nielsen, spend some time with us interpreting it, saying it's a general realm. It's fuzzier than regulatory by review, but that is the way it was written. And largely that, I don't think that when it was done was meant to say that we think 300 dwelling units per acre are bad projects. It was more that didn't seem achievable. Developers have gotten very efficient in how they put units in buildings, and we are seeing a lot of proposals that we didn't see before, and that frankly nowhere else in the region has seen before in terms of the units per acre.
Madam Chair, Ms. Mays, how can you describe an acre to me as it pertains to city blocks? Is it one city block? Is it an average downtown city block? Is that an acre?
That is a good question. I'm not good at ballparking that. Jason, do you have a good sense of the downtown city block?
That's what I meant, yeah. Committee members, a typical downtown block would be, I believe, several acres in size.
I mean, I guess I'm just wondering about some of these projects in my ward that have happened already. So they just basically happened and the comp plan didn't address them? So, I mean, I have a project we just approved today that has great support, the Krause-Anderson block. That's going to have almost 400 units on it, and people love that and think it's great. And what about 110 Grant or Marquette Place that have lots of units and they're on a part of a block? So it really shouldn't be viewed as something that is helping anything happen, but almost correcting something that's already happened that no one's had a problem with, correct?
Yeah, it's the projects that have come forward before, they've had support and other reasons. It's just a matter of consistency. It has not been an issue before, but it's been brought to our attention that we need to address it.
Okay, well, I can think of like 4 things going on in my ward right now. The Handicraft Guild building It's only on a teeny tiny portion of the block, so it's probably under an acre, but they're doing a lot of micro units. So there's lots of units on a small space, and it's downtown, and for the most part, people in downtown, and there's 39,000 of us living downtown, think it's great. So if this is just simply kind of correcting in the big picture while we're looking at a micro level at every project, I think it's a great change to make.
Councilmember Reich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And in consultation with Councilmember Fry and staff, I'd like to make a slight adjustment to the wording of the amendment we have before us. And sorry I didn't have it printed out, but it basically de-emphasizes specific titles of activity centers and makes it more generic. And then also reinforces the importance of adopted small area plans. And it reads thusly, it's densities up to 800 acre may be allowed in or near all designated growth centers and within activity centers adjacent to growth centers and consistent with adopted small area plans. So a slight adjustment per request of the council member.
Okay, so I'll just take that as a motion to approve the amended amendment to the comp plan. So is there, and we'll make sure we get that language to the clerk so that you have that detail. Is there further discussion? Councilmember Fry, did you want to speak?
Just briefly, thank you, Madam Chair. The overarching purpose here is, one, to eliminate inconsistencies. As you know, our zoning code operates off of floor area ratio, whereas the comprehensive plan operates off of numbers of units per acre. And those two classifications can come up with significantly different results. Not to mention, with the issue with EAW, the EAW being required, we're already significantly out of compliance with several buildings, including Foremark, La Rive, and several others that have exceeded the 200 units per acre. I believe Foremark is somewhere in the range of, Ms. Mays, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's 700 units per acre. And it's because it's more of a point style tower, and the units are substantially smaller. So when we talk about wanting to increase our density, as well as accommodating some of these younger populations that are looking for not a whole lot of space, that's the entire reason behind this. And, to a certain extent, if we're really gonna grow the city to a world-class stature, you can't just be the council member for those that live here. You also have to be the council member for those that don't live here yet. And this makes sure that we're moving in that direction. So it's, then by the way, the reason the 800, that particular number is somewhat arbitrary. It could be 700, it could be 900. In fact, we wanted just not to have an upper limit in terms of high density to allow for significant taller buildings downtown. But the Met Council requires a discrete number for purposes of calculating sewers. Happy to answer any questions.
Sure. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can see where this could potentially create some unnecessary concern. And that's why I think it's good to have the language in the plan with regard to small area plans. I'll use my own ward as an example. In Loring Park, up in the Loring Hill area, there's a small area plan and zoning that would never allow for something anywhere near that kind of density. So I think given that zoning and small area plans rule more than the comp plan, we're not going to see these kinds of things where there is significant concern about them. And it would make it easier for neighborhoods like that one to help the city increase its density by allowing it where there's very good zoning and lots of support.
Okay. Councilmember Reich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just can't help but take advantage of the moment where the Met Council concern is obviously a really good way to highlight our capacity as a city to grow and support the density where it's appropriate is contingent on having the infrastructure that supports it. And so it's not always the showstopper part of development, but I think as we move forward with the city's goals of growth, that we really take in consideration anew our infrastructure needs for that future growth.
Great. Just to kind of recap this discussion, as well as we did have over an hour of testimony about this at the Planning Commission and a robust discussion among planning commissioners, because although, as Councilmember Goodman said and Councilmember Fry, this is really a technical change that's, adjusting our policy to keep up with the market. it's really spurring a lot of discussion, along with Councilmember Egg's points about how our city is growing. There was testimony at Planning Commission about the need to make sure we're investing in infrastructure in high-density neighborhoods, and I know we're both excited to tackle those issues in the comprehensive plan update that's coming up. So thank you to staff for your work on this, and I think the amendment is very appropriate, just clarifying the language as it was proposed originally. So if there's no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that carries. That is our final item, so we are adjourned. Thank you.